It was the summer of 1943. Across the ocean, Europe was at war. Cities were burning, armies were clashing, and the world seemed to be falling apart. But far away from the front lines, in the quiet plains of Texas, a different kind of story was beginning. A story about enemies who found something human in each other. In the small town of Hearne, Texas, a group of military trucks rolled down a dusty road. Inside those trucks sat several German women prisoners of war. They had been captured in Europe and sent across the Atlantic. None of them knew what to expect. They imagined barbed water, angry guards, and endless punishment. To them, America was the land of the enemy. But what they found in Texas was nothing like what they had imagined. When the gates opened, they saw wide open fields, wooden fences, and cowboys on horses. The air smelled of hay, cattle, and sunshine. It was quiet, almost peaceful. The women looked at each other, confused. This was supposed to be a prison. Why did it feel so different? The guards did not yell. The food was warm. The Texans even smiled at them. For women who had seen only fear and hate for years, it felt almost unreal. One of the prisoners was a young nurse named Anna Weiss. She had served with the German Army Medical Corps before being captured in Italy. Anna was strong, proud, and tired of war. As she looked around the camp, she whispered to herself, "So this is America." The next morning, as the sun rose over the dry Texas land, Anna saw something that made her stop. A group of American guards were saddling up horses near the fence. Their hats, boots, and calm voices were like something out of a storybook. One of the prisoners laughed softly and said, "They ride to guard us. We'll never be near a horse again." Anna smiled sadly. She missed the days when she used to ride with her father before the war. Those days felt like a lifetime ago. A few days later, the prisoners were assigned to help with farm work. Many of the local men were away fighting in Europe, and the ranchers needed help with crops and cattle. The government allowed the prisoners to work under supervision. When Anna's name was called, she expected chains. She thought they would be forced to march under armed guards. Instead, a tall cowboy with kind eyes approached her. "Morning, ma'am," he said with a slow drawl. "You ever been on a horse?" Anna blinked in disbelief. "A horse?" she repeated. "Yeah," he said, tightening the saddle strap. "Out here, we don't chain folks. We work with them." Then he handed her the reins of a chestnut mare. Anna froze. She didn't know what to say. Was this a test? Would they laugh at her? But no one did. The cowboy simply nodded and said, "She's gentle. Name's Jack." Anna climbed onto the horse. The saddle creaked. The wind brushed her face. She felt the world move under her, and for the first time since the war began, she felt something she had forgotten. Freedom. The other women watched in silence. Then another cowboy brought out a second horse, and another. Soon several of the women were riding through the fields, working beside the Americans, laughing quietly to themselves. That afternoon, when they returned to the camp, the women could not stop talking about it. The fear in their eyes had been replaced with something else, hope. That night, Anna wrote in her notebook, "They let me ride again. I did not expect kindness from the enemy. Perhaps we are all just people trying to survive this war." As the days passed, the women learned more about their guards. Jack, the tall cowboy, had lost his younger brother in Europe. Yet he never showed hatred towards them. He said once, "The war is not here. You ain't the ones who killed him. You're just caught in it, same as us." For the German women, those words meant more than he could ever know. The camp slowly became a strange kind of community. The prisoners helped with farming, fixed fences, and cooked meals. They even began to learn English. The Texans were fascinated by their accents, and the women were amused by the cowboy slang. At night, the sound of harmonicas and laughter often drifted across the fields. Some of the guards brought guitars, and sometimes the prisoners sang old German songs. One evening, a few locals from the nearby town came to watch the women perform a small play. They were surprised to see the enemy acting, singing, and smiling. One of the guards said, "You'd never think we were fighting the same folks overseas." By Christmas, the war still raged on in Europe, but inside the Texas camp, something remarkable happened. The guards brought a small pine tree and gave it to the prisoners. The women decorated it with paper stars and handmade ornaments. That night, the Americans and the Germans gathered together and sang "Silent Night." The English words and the German ones blended into one soft, peaceful sound under the Texas sky. For a few minutes, there were no enemies, no uniforms, no sides, just people, tired of fighting, sharing a song. Months later, the Red Cross allowed the prisoners to send letters home. Anna wrote to her mother in Germany, "We are treated well. The Americans are not what we were told. One of them taught me to ride a horse. They call me Miss Anna. I never thought I would smile again." Her letter, like many others, showed a different side of war that few people ever heard about. Not everyone in Texas approved of how the prisoners were treated. Some locals said the government was being too soft. "They're the enemy," they said. "Why treat them kindly?" But the Cowboys believed something different. Jack once said, "We can't control what happens over there, but here we can still be decent." It was this belief that made the Texas POW camps stand out. Across the state, prisoners worked on farms, painted murals, and even built small theaters. Many Americans came to respect the discipline and craftsmanship of the German prisoners. But the women's camp remained special. It was smaller, quieter, and filled with a different kind of energy, one that came from shared struggle and unexpected trust. As the war neared its end in 1945, rumors spread that the prisoners would soon be sent home. For most, it was a moment of relief, but for some, like Anna, it was bittersweet. Texas had become a strange kind of home. Before she left, Anna visited the stables one last time. Jack was there, brushing down a horse. She handed him a small wooden figure she had carved, a horse, made from scrap wood. "For you," she said softly, "to remember us." Jack smiled, took off his hat and said, "Thank you, Miss Anna. Don't forget Texas." As the train left the station, Anna looked out the window. The golden fields stretched endlessly under the sun. She whispered, "I won't." When she finally returned to Germany, everything was different. The cities were in ruins, the war was over, but the memories remained. And sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she could still hear the wind of the Texas plains and the sound of hooves beneath her. Years later, historians would find letters and diaries from those camps. They told stories not of violence or hatred, but of respect, compassion, and small acts of humanity that survived even in wartime.
When the war ended in 1945, the world was broken. Cities lay in ruins, families were scattered, and millions struggled to rebuild their lives. For the German women prisoners in Texas, the end of the war brought both hope and fear. They had been far from home for years, and now they were told they would finally be sent back to Germany. But leaving Texas was not as easy as they thought it would be. Over time, that dusty land had become something more than a prison. It had become a strange kind of refuge, a place where enemies had learned to understand each other. On their last morning at Camp Hearn, the women packed their few belongings, letters, carvings, and small gifts they had made during their stay. Many cried quietly. Even the guards seemed heavy-hearted. Anna Weiss stood near the fence where she had first watched the Cowboys ride years earlier. The same field stretched before her, golden under the rising sun. Jack walked up, his hat pulled low over his eyes. "You ready?" he asked. Anna smiled sadly. "As ready as I can be." He nodded. "The world's changing, Miss Anna. Maybe it'll be kinder now." "I hope so," she replied. "And thank you, Jack, for everything." Jack looked out over the fields and said softly, "You take care now. Don't forget Texas." The trucks rolled out soon after. As they disappeared down the dirt road, the guards stood silently. A few waved. It was the quiet end of something that no one could quite explain. A friendship born out of war. When the German women finally reached their homeland, they found a country that no longer looked like home. Cities like Dresden and Berlin were destroyed. Food was scarce. Many of their families were gone. The women who had survived the American camps were now seen with suspicion. People asked where they had been, how they had lived, what the Americans had done to them. Anna found her mother alive but frail, living in a ruined apartment in Hamburg. When she told her about Texas, her mother could hardly believe it. "They gave you horses?" her mother asked, stunned. Anna nodded. "Yes, they treated us like people, like equals." Her mother shook her head slowly. "Then maybe there is hope for the world after all." In the years that followed, life in post-war Germany was hard. There was hunger, chaos, and guilt. But for Anna and the other women who had seen Texas, there was also a quiet strength. They had seen kindness in the unlikeliest place, from the very people they had once been told to hate. Anna began working as a nurse again, this time for displaced families and children. Sometimes, when she cared for American soldiers stationed in occupied Germany, she would smile and say, "I knew men like you once, in Texas." Many of the women kept small mementos from the camp, hand-carved horses, bits of fabric, and letters written by the guards. For years, these things stayed hidden in drawers and boxes. The world wanted to forget the war, not remember it. But decades later, historians began uncovering stories from those Texas camps. They found reports, photos, and testimonies that painted a surprising picture. Instead of cruelty, there had been respect. Instead of hatred, there had been understanding. Some of the American guards had written letters, too. One letter from a Texas sergeant to his wife read, "Funny thing about them German gals, they came here scared to death, but they worked hard, smiled often, and never gave us trouble. One of them carved me a little horse. Guess I'll keep it as a reminder that even in war, folks can be decent." These letters, simple as they were, showed a side of the war that rarely made it into history books. Back in America, the old prison camps were eventually closed. The fences came down. The land returned to the ranchers, and the fields grew quiet again. But in some places, traces of that strange chapter remained. Old murals painted by prisoners could still be found on the walls of barns. Pieces of handmade furniture, crafted by German POWs, were still used by local families. In Hearne, Texas, people told stories about the time when the enemy lived among them and turned out not to be enemies at all. In the late 1960s, a historian from Texas A&M University began researching the German POW experience in the state. During his interviews with local residents, he heard the same thing again and again. They were good people, hard workers, polite. I'd never have guessed we were supposed to be fighting them. He also tracked down letters from some of the former prisoners. One of them, written by a woman believed to be Anna, read, "I will never forget the kindness I found in Texas. It was there I learned that the world is not divided by borders, but by fear. And that fear can be overcome by simple acts, like a cowboy handing you a horse instead of a chain." As time passed, the memories of that unlikely friendship faded. The people who lived through it grew old, but the story remained. Whispered in family tales, written in old diaries, preserved in museums. In 1995, 50 years after the end of the war, a small ceremony was held in Hearne, Texas. Local historians and a few German visitors gathered to honor the memory of the prisoners who had once lived there. Among them was an elderly woman with silver hair and gentle eyes. Her name was Anna Weiss. It was her first time back in Texas. She stood in the same field where she had first learned to ride again. The camp was gone, but the wide Texas sky looked just the same. When a reporter asked her what she remembered most, she said quietly, "The kindness. I thought I'd find hate here, but I found humanity instead." She smiled, looking toward the horizon. "I think that's what saved me." The ceremony ended with a local cowboy presenting her with a small wooden horse carved by a local artist. She held it close and said, "Thank you for remembering." That moment symbolized something greater than just one story. It showed that compassion could survive even the darkest times. After the ceremony, a young American girl approached Anna and asked, "Were you really a prisoner?" Anna nodded gently. "Yes, dear. But sometimes being a prisoner isn't about fences. It's about what's inside you. And sometimes people can set you free without even knowing it." As the years rolled on, Anna's story continued to spread. Documentaries, books, and articles began to explore the POW camps of America, not as places of cruelty, but as examples of how decency endured even in war. Historians found that more than 400,000 German prisoners had been held in the United States during World War II. Texas had one of the largest numbers, with over 70 camps spread across the state. Most of them followed the same humane rules: good food, fair treatment, and opportunities for work. But among all those stories, the one about the women and the cowboys stood out. It represented something pure, a meeting of two worlds that should have hated each other, but didn't. Many Texans who had worked with the prisoners said later that the experience changed their views on the war. They realized that most of the young Germans were not monsters, just people caught in a tragedy far bigger than themselves.
Decades passed since the war ended. The world changed in ways that no one could have imagined. The scars of World War II began to fade, but for those who had lived through it, the memories never disappeared. For the German women who had been prisoners in Texas, life after the war was a long journey of rebuilding, not only their homes, but also their faith in humanity. Among them, Anna Weiss carried the story of Texas wherever she went. She never forgot the cowboys who had treated her with dignity, the horses that had given her a taste of freedom, and the wide skies that had reminded her there was still beauty in the world. In the 1950s, Germany was divided, struggling to rise from its ruins. Anna worked as a nurse in the Western Zone, helping to rebuild hospitals and care for war orphans. Many of her colleagues had never left Europe. They could not imagine the strange kindness she described from across the ocean. When she told them about Texas, about the cowboys and the open fields, they often smiled in disbelief. One nurse once said, "You speak of your prison as if it were heaven." Anna would answer softly, "Because, in a way, it was. It was the first place I remembered what kindness felt like." As years passed, Anna married another former prisoner of war who had also returned from the United States. His name was Carl, a quiet man who had worked on a farm in Oklahoma during his captivity. They built a small home near Munich, filled with books, photographs, and the smell of freshly baked bread. On the mantel sat a small wooden horse, the same one she had once carved in Texas. To Anna, it wasn't just a souvenir, it was a symbol of everything she had learned, that compassion could survive even in a world of chaos. In America, meanwhile, the story of the POW camps faded into the background of history. People remembered D-Day, Hiroshima, and the victory parades, but not the quiet fields of Texas where enemies had once shared laughter. But in some towns, the memories lingered. Older Texans still remembered the young German women who had worked beside them in the cotton fields. They remembered the songs sung in German, the laughter at lunchtime, and the polite thank you that crossed language barriers. In the 1980s, a local newspaper in Texas published an article titled "The POWs Who Became Friends." It described how towns like Hearne, Tyler, and Bastrop had once hosted thousands of German prisoners, and how, against all expectations, they had been treated with decency and respect. The article sparked curiosity among younger generations. People began to ask questions. Who were these prisoners? What happened to them? And why had so few people ever heard their stories? One day, a university student from Austin named Rachel started researching the subject for her thesis. She visited old archives, read dusty reports, and found letters written by both guards and prisoners. That's when she discovered Anna's name. In one letter preserved by the Texas Historical Commission, Anna had written in elegant handwriting, "I came here expecting chains. I left with hope. The men who guarded us were not cruel. They were cowboys, honest, kind, and human. They showed me that freedom is not just a place. It is how we treat one another." Rachel was fascinated. She decided to find out if Anna was still alive. Through months of searching, she traced her to a small town in Germany. Anna was then 86 years old, frail but sharp-minded. When Rachel wrote to her, she received a simple reply, "I remember Texas. You may come." Rachel traveled across the Atlantic to meet her. In a quiet room filled with old photographs and the smell of coffee, she met Anna, now with silver hair, warm eyes, and a calm grace that only time could give. "You are from Texas?" Anna asked in her soft German accent. "Yes, ma'am," Rachel smiled, "from near Herne." Anna laughed gently. "Then you have come from the land that saved my heart." They spoke for hours. Anna told her everything about the camp, the horses, Jack the cowboy, and the Christmas night when they sang Silent Night together. Rachel listened, her eyes filled with tears. "I never heard any of this in school," she said. Anna smiled. History often forgets kindness. It prefers the sound of guns. When Rachel returned to Texas, she shared Anna's story in her thesis. It was later published as a book called Horses, Not Chains: The Forgotten Kindness of Texas POW Camps. The book received attention across America. Historians, teachers, and even veterans began to discuss the forgotten chapter of humanity during the war. Schools in Texas started including lessons about the POW camps in their local history classes. Museums added new exhibits. Old photographs were restored. And slowly, the story that had once been buried under the dust of time began to shine again. In 2001, Anna passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside her husband Carl under a small tree near Munich. On her gravestone were the words she had once written to Jack, "Even enemies can ride together." Back in Texas, Rachel helped organize a permanent memorial at the site of the old Herne camp. The monument was simple, a bronze statue of a cowboy standing beside a woman holding a horse's reins. The plaque below read, "In memory of those who found friendship and freedom in a time of war." At the dedication ceremony, veterans, historians, and families gathered under the wide Texas sky. Among them was an old man wearing a weathered hat and boots. His name was Samuel Hayes, and he was the son of Jack, the cowboy who had once handed Anna a horse. When reporters asked him about the story, Samuel smiled and said, "My daddy used to tell me about her. He said that war can make men cruel, but Texas made him kind again." The crowd stood in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon. Then, from a speaker, a recording of Silent Night began to play, both in English and German. The sound drifted across the open fields, just as it had nearly 60 years before. People wiped tears from their eyes. It wasn't just a memorial to the past. It was a reminder to the future that compassion can outlive war, borders, and time itself. Years later, Rachel's book was adapted into a documentary. Viewers around the world were moved by the story of how a group of Texas cowboys treated German women prisoners with respect instead of cruelty. Letters began pouring into the museum in Herne from people across the world. Some wrote, "This story restored my faith in humanity." Others said, "It made me see that even in war, goodness can survive." In one of the final scenes of the documentary, the camera showed the Texas fields at sunset, golden light falling across the same land where it had all happened. A narrator's voice said, "They came as prisoners, expecting chains, but they left with something far greater, the memory of a kindness that changed their lives forever." The story of the German women POWs and the Texas Cowboys became more than just a tale of the past. it became a lesson for every generation that followed. It taught that the strength of a nation is not measured only by its armies, but by its mercy.